Hi y'all, how are you doing? Recently I tried a Minecraft building challenge to make one build every day for 5 days straight. I did each of these builds in a 25 by 25 plot, so if you want to try this challenge for yourself, just plop down a plot in your creative world and start building. My building style is usually on the larger side, so on the first day I went easy on myself, and just went with a simple medieval blacksmith house. The first thing I had to do was really nail down the style of this house. So when I was shaping out the build, I went for this slanted style roof. This really helped put the build into a rugged fantasy style build. I then had to figure out where the furnace for the house would go. I couldn't get the furnace to look right on the left side, but I figured out if I moved the furnace to the right side of the house, I could have the chimney sort of creep along the steep side of the roof, which really helped it fit well into the build. But then I had to figure out what would go on the less slanted side of the house. I decided to add a little stone section just to add a bit more variety in the materials, and I also added a second floor on the left side to give the build a bit more shape. You don't want your builds leaning too heavily onto one side, so I always try and even them out if it looks like there's too much on one side compared to the other. I then started to add more details to the area. I added a second chimney to the left side of the house and started on a bit of terrain. I put a small pond in front of the house to add a bit more detail to the terrain. I found that ponds are a good way to add detail without obstructing the view of the build. This is why you won't tend to see me put trees in front of my builds, because it obstructs the view and it covers up the house that you spent so long working on. To finish off the terrain though, I put a cliff in the background and put some trees on it where they wouldn't obstruct the view. I also went around and added a few bushes and grass to the area just to finish off the look. Day 2 starts similarly to day 1, but this is actually a style I've been wanting to try for a long time. I'm doing a steampunk build today, and believe it or not, I've never actually used any copper in any of my builds so far. To start, I spent a lot of time setting up the unique shape of the style. I use a lot of towers for the shape and don't really have one set body to the house. Once I get the main shaping done, I start to fill it in with the standard medieval palette I used for the last build, except for the copper roof that I decided to use, which will help it fit in with the style more. A lot of the style comes in with the detailing portion. I start off by just putting some small piles of barrels around the base of the house, and I also connect some of the sections with some copper pipes. At this point though, I decided I needed a lot stronger details to the build, so I decided to turn the top tower into a windmill in order to supply whatever machinery is on the inside with some power. I had a few gears jutting out the side of this house, and I find that they fit a lot better than the random pipes I had earlier, and they help to imply motion to the build, which does a lot more than just the still pipes would have done. What some of you might not know yet is that I'm a pretty strong acacia hater, so I'm really proud that I was able to get this gear down without using any acacia wood. What you see a lot of people use when they're building with copper is acacia trapdoors for their detailing, but what I figured out is I could use jungle wood instead, which actually gives you a bit more texture to your copper, because it gives a bit more color to your copper than just the flat acacia wood. But after pasting this gear around a bit and finishing off the terrain, day 3 came to a close. On day 3, my idea was to go for an Oriental styled temple. This is a very different style from my usual build, so it took me a while to figure out what I wanted this build to end up as. I spent a lot of time messing with the shape of this build, and especially the roofs. And to be honest, I'm not quite sure if I'm happy with how the roofs ended up. To start, I did the standard square roofs with the pinched up corners, but on the second story, I didn't want to just repeat the same design, so instead, I went for this cone-shaped roof. The thing is though with this part, I'm not sure it completely fits in with the style. Because of this, at first glance, when people see it, they don't immediately think that it's an Oriental style temple. What I think saved it though was the unique block choice I used. I used mushroom stem blocks for the body to get a neat white color, and for the roofs I used nether brick blocks. A lot of people find these blocks hard to use, but I find they work really well together. To finish off this build, I put it on some elevated terrain, with a path running off the edge of the plot. I also put a pink cherry blossom tree in the corner of the path, just to give the area a bit more color on that side of the plot. This helps because I did push the build into that one corner, and this helps to spread out the color a lot more. On day 4, I really had no idea what I was going to build. The only thing I knew I wanted to do was some sort of tower. I started trying to make one of those medieval turret style towers, but over time I realized that style really wasn't going anywhere. Plus in this challenge I've already done a few medieval style builds, so I want to change this one up. I started out by just changing the color to a blackstone and basalt theme, but then I realized this shape doesn't fit the new style. So what I decided to do was to just cut off the entire top half of the build. What I did then is I took the bottom half and I flared out the top part. And then I went out and did that again, but for the top bit. This gave me a few points of detail that I could go around it and add spikes to. The way I was able to get the shape of this tower down felt a lot like terraining. I just sort of placed blocks in a pattern that looked like a natural curve, and then I connected them up. The only difference really between this and doing standard terrain is I did a lot more smoothing on this one, and made sure that everything is as symmetrical as possible. I also had to make sure I was able to curve the blackstone frames around the build but I found this works out well because I could just have them morph into the spikes at the top of the build. At the top, I started by trying to go with this Eye of Sauron sort of thing, but I decided that didn't really work well. So instead, I just went for one big psychic ball of fire. I was able to get this done with a good mixture of orange glass and red glass, and placing in some glass paint in there just to give it a bit more rugged feeling. Once I was finished with the main tower portion, I moved it up and started working on some of the terrain. For this terrain, some of my friends convinced me to use a gradient. So for the gradient, I tried to keep all the darker blocks toward where the shadows would be. So I would have the darkest portions on the innermost bits of rock, and I'd have some of the lighter portions, like the nether wart, near where the lava is, or by the top, where the light would be hitting. This build was a fun experiment, and I like how it turned out. For the final day, I decided I wanted to end it off with a castle. For the shaping on this one, I really wanted to fill up the plot and leave no empty space. I was originally going to go for a medieval style castle, but eventually it started leaning more towards the fantasy style. The style really shone through in the unique block palette. I decided to use stripped jungle wood for the house bit. It has a lighter color than most woods, and I think it fits really well with the stone portions. On the roof, I used crimson wood to give the building a bit more of a vibrant color. I usually try and keep the color palette down to a certain number of colors. It just keeps it easier to keep track of everything, and helps stop the build from looking all muddled. I usually pick 1 or 2 vibrant colors to use it as an accent for the whole build. Whenever I choose any more colors than that, it starts being more difficult to choose colors for the rest of the build. Once everything else was finished with the castle, I started working on the terrain. I wanted to keep the terrain shallow in this build, just because I didn't feel like this build would fit well in any extreme terrain. This feels like a really mellow castle that you would just find out in a field somewhere. I did detail the terrain a bit though, with a little pond out in the front, and a path leading from the front door. This challenge is very helpful if you want to work on improving your builds. It really forces you to work quicker than you usually would. I tend to spend a lot of time being indecisive about what I want to build. This challenge really made me speed up that process and just start building. I really do suggest that all of you try this building challenge. But before you do that, watch this video here. It has a lot of good building tips, especially if you're just getting started. And if you do decide to try this challenge, let me know in the comments. I'd love to see y'all's progress.